there is this discussion about needing to do health care before they do tax reform. The reason why that is because Republicans intend to use this same vehicle, budget reconciliation, to do tax reform because they don't think that they can get any Democrat votes. Now, that may or may not be true. I know a lot of Democrats out there that want to see certainly corporate tax reform done. The individual side's a little trickier. In order to use budget reconciliation is all about setting up a baseline of amount of money that you need to raise in a given year. And if they do Obamacare first, Obamacare repeal first, the benefit of that is that Obamacare repeal is going to repeal a lot of the taxes that were put in place by Obamacare. So that's going to take down the amount of revenue a tax reform package would need to raise. So it's a little bit of a budget gimmick, but not really, in the sense that the reconciliation process is always keyed against how much revenue the government needs to raise. So if they do Obamacare repeal first, that's going to lower the baseline. For next year, when they do tax reform, it's going to make it easier because they're not going to need to raise as much money. So that's the reason why they want to clear the decks and do Obamacare repeal first. There's also just a procedural reason they need to do Obamacare first, which is that they've already passed a budget for fiscal year 17, and that budget talks about repealing and replacing Obamacare, and they can't get to the next year's budget until they get rid of the Obamacare discussion. So there are procedural reasons why they've got to do Obamacare first. Also, frankly, the attention span of members of Congress can be relatively limited. And so the idea is simply, and that's not a normative statement, that just happens to be a statement of fact. I mean, these guys are very busy. So they've got to do Obamacare first, and that's why McConnell says, look, I want to get Obamacare done by the 4th of July. Then, of course, they take the whole month of August off, and they'll be back in September, the hope being that they can dispose of all of this Obamacare stuff before the August recess. So they'll pass the Senate before July 4th. They'll spend the month of July working on a resolution between Senate and House. They'll clear Obamacare out by August. Then they'll come back in September and do tax reform. On tax reform, really, the challenge with tax reform is this. The president has a tax reform plan that he put out. And that plan has a very ambitious set of rate reductions. On the corporate side, they want to take the statutory rate from 35% down to 15%. On the individual side, they want to flatten the tax code to 3 individual tax brackets. They want to do a lot of trimming of exemptions and deductions and credits, particularly for higher income taxpayers. They want to do something known as a repatriation holiday, which would be a one-time tax holiday for money parked overseas to be brought back to the United States. They want to do a permanent transition to what's known as a territorial system of taxation. Currently, as it exists now, we essentially tax foreign earned profit twice. It's taxed once by the jurisdiction in which the capital is earned. It's taxed a second time by the United States. The idea would be to simply tax that revenue once. So these are all great ideas, I think, from an economic growth perspective. The challenge becomes, will the tax cut be paid for? And a lot of Republicans in the Congress, including Paul Ryan, have always maintained that it's crucially important that that tax cut be paid for. The administration is less interested. I think they're more interested potentially in a deficit finance tax reform. But we'll see where that goes. At the end of the day, though, the tax reform debate isn't any easier than the Obamacare debate. So the notion that you're going to go from a tough topic to an easier one is a little bit Pollyanna-ish. I mean, tax reform is really hard. There's a reason we haven't had a tax reform since 1986.